Hi there, everybody. Steve, the amateur historian. How are you all doing tonight? I'm back here with you with another mysterious case that I want to cover. And this one, like a lot of others I've covered, can't be fully determined for absolute certain to be a murder case, even though it seems like it's pretty likely was the end result here. But this is another one of those situations where maybe it was foul play, maybe it was an accident. Nobody knows for absolute certain, but it's a very intriguing case, and one that, as I was digging around, some others, I believe primarily on Reddit is where I found it, people suggested a possible correlation to another case. When I look at the information between the two, there's obvious interesting comparisons. I don't know if there's enough there to suggest a link, but the timing and the circumstances and what both these women were doing, it's very interesting, so I will be addressing that a little bit later on, but the focus of this story is a case of a woman who went missing many years ago and hasn't been seen since. This is the story of Irin Marie Meyer, who vanished back in 1979. So Irin Meyer was 29 years old in 1979, and she was from St. Louis. She'd been living there. She'd been working primarily as a waitress. And the way I've seen it written, I don't know if it's exact, this is exactly how it went, but it's kind of implied that she almost just kind of had an epiphany that she needed to kind of break away from potentially like the monotony of her current life. And she packed some things into a car, just her and her cat. She left her job, left her home, and she went out on the road and she drove cross country heading west from St. Louis, heading towards the West Coast. And it seems like part of this was probably just a chance to get away, a chance to see more of the country, a chance to live life in a new and or different way. It was reported that she also had family and friends on the West Coast as well, so it was kind of a double positive, if you can call it that, that she could travel around, see the world a little bit, have some fun, and also get to see some people that she maybe hadn't seen for a while. And over the course of these travels, by the later part of July 1979, Irin found herself in Southern Oregon near the coast. And specifically by July 20th, 1979, Meyer had found a place to stop and camp along the beach at a place called Harris Beach, which has been described in some of the information on this case as being in Gold Beach, Oregon, but it's actually a pretty good distance south of Gold Beach and is actually much closer to the town of Brookings, which is kind of one of the last towns you pass through if you're going south before you hit the Oregon-California border. And people have talked a lot about the strangeness and the oddities of Brookings. I've seen people write pieces about all the just odd things that have happened there. I remember several years ago, while I was traveling along the highway with my girlfriend and her mom, there was like a massive sinkhole that happened in Brookings, just huge, just swallowed up a huge chunk of road. And we didn't even know if we were going to be able to get through there. Unfortunately, we were able to kind of use a detour and continue along our way. But Harris Beach is only about 2 miles or so, 2 or 3 miles north of Brookings along the Oregon coast. Irin settled in there with her cat, set up camp. She'd paid for a couple of days to stay there, so it was inferred that she would be there for a little while. And on the 20th specifically, she left her established campsite there and drove into Brookings and visited a market there. And As far as anybody knows, that's the last time that she was seen alive, was when she went to this store and she bought a few groceries, some cat food, things to keep both her and her cat fed and maintained during their brief stay in this area. And she had actually left her cat behind in her tent. And I know when I was reading through various like message boards and things like that discussing this case, a lot of people discussed and in some cases got fixated on her cat because she did leave the cat behind, went to the store, and then vanished. Now, before anybody panics, the cat was ultimately found in the tent, and while the cat was extremely hungry, the cat was alive and fine. The cat did not, you know, didn't reach a sad ending for those of you concerned about animals like myself. So and everybody that knew Irin said that she loved her cat. That she was not going to be gone for a prolonged period of time if she didn't bring her cat with her. And it makes sense if she was just going to go to the store real quick to grab some odds and ends. Round trip is only about 5 miles from the beach to the store. And then you add, I mean, if she was only grabbing a few things, she probably would have only been in the store for about 15 minutes. So we're talking worst case scenario, she probably wouldn't have even been gone a half hour, like at the most. She would have been gone that long. And a cat, exactly, you're perfectly fine to attend to themselves for a 30-minute period. I don't know if I do it. I mean, if there's a lot of other campers around and the people I don't know, I might worry that they were going to take our cat, but that's neither here or there under these circumstances. But it seems abundantly clear that she was not planning on being gone very long. She was going to come back and be with her cat, but something happened. Exactly. And we don't know exactly what that was, and we're left very much in the dark about what could have happened to Irin after she left this store. It doesn't appear anybody saw her have an encounter with a strange individual. She didn't, say, pick up somebody, give somebody a ride, pick up a hitchhiker or something. It doesn't seem like she would do that anyway under those circumstances because, I mean, first of all, when you've got a cat to get back to, you don't really want to get led astray by a bunch of riffraff. And on such a short trek like that, and this is not somebody who's like traveling around for work. This is somebody that's having kind of their own private American road trip to a degree. It doesn't seem under those circumstances that she would give anybody a ride, but obviously, at the same time, it seems like she had to have an encounter with somebody. So she goes missing, and the cat's found in the tent. That's kind of the first sign that something's awry here. Whose campsite is this? They left their cat behind. Who was supposed to be here? What happened? And mind you, again, this is July 20th. July 29th, Irin Meyer's car is found, which was a green AMC Gremlin hatchback. And it was discovered in a parking lot at a place called Whales Head Beach State Park, which was roughly about 5 or so miles north of Harris Beach. And that's really the only piece of evidence or really lead that there is out there regarding Irin Meyer after she left that marketplace, because she hasn't been seen since. Nobody has any clue what happened, but all we know is that somehow, some way, if this is where her campsite is and the store's down here in Brookings, her car somehow made it from here past Harris Beach and up here to this other state park area that I think is an area where a lot of, I think there's a pretty good sized campground in that area and a lot of RVs and stuff. And it seems like somebody would have seen something. Somebody would have seen that car being parked there. Who did they see driving the car? Was it somebody who looked like Irin? Was it somebody that didn't look like her? Someone that couldn't have been her? Somebody ditching a car somewhere because something happened. So it seems abundantly clear to me that she never made it back to Harris Beach. Obviously, she would have tended to her cat, had that been the case. And the groceries and stuff she bought from the store were still in her car when it was found. So that's another indication that I don't think she ever made it back to her campsite, because she, if she did, she wouldn't have even been there long enough to remove those items from her car. And yet, when you return from the store, the first thing you do in any scenario is you take the items you bought out of the car and relocate them to your home or your campsite, whatever the circumstances may be. So, whatever the situation is, her car ended up passing by where her campground was and was found north of there. So that indicates to me some kind of nefarious activity, probably on the part of somebody else. Somebody got to her. Somebody maybe was playing nice, talking to her. She left the store and somehow ingratiated themselves into her car with her or took her away by force. And it seems kind of unlikely. This has certainly happened before. There's been a lot of brazen abductions that have happened in broad daylight. But it doesn't seem likely that she would have been taken from the vicinity of the parking lot where the store was, right in the middle of town during the day, other patrons walking around. That could have happened, but it seems again like somebody would have seen something. So either a very brazen abductor got very lucky and managed to take her from that scene without being seen, or something else happened. But whatever the case, it definitely seems like somebody got to her. Now, authorities did contemplate the possibility that Irin Meyer may have met with death, but that death may have been an accident. And while this is a possibility, I also feel like this is kind of the standard when you have a troubling case that's a mystery, somebody's gone missing, you don't know where they are. It's starting to look like one of those cases that may go unsolved, and unsolved cases don't look good for police departments, and it can get the general public kind of pissed. So there is a tendency sometimes to want to find the easiest possible solution that addresses everything. Why did this person go missing? What happened? Without there being foul play. Because if there's a mysterious murder, you have a suspect you need to look for that you may never find. And again, that doesn't reflect well on law enforcement. So authorities have always contemplated the possibility that Irin Meyer may have fallen into the ocean. She may have climbed up on a cliff or gone to a treacherous area, a viewpoint, and she could have accidentally fallen to her death and been literally just washed away by the ocean. Now, that's certainly not impossible. That has happened before, too. Some people that go to the beach and disappear, sometimes the ocean takes them away. But under these circumstances, I really don't see any real evidence pointing in that direction. Yeah, I certainly don't think, for instance, that Irin Meyer, if she did fall into the ocean, that she was at Harris Beach, where her campground was set up when she did it, because again, I don't see any evidence that she went back there. And what's interesting is the Whales Head Beach State Park, the area where her car was found was actually on the east side of Highway 101, which is the highway that runs along the coast from pretty much the Washington border with Canada all the way down to the California border with Mexico. It just runs the whole west coastline. So west of Highway 101 is where the ocean is. But the parking lot where her car was found was on the other side. Now, obviously, she could have gotten out of her car, walked across the street, and then gone down to the beach. But it just seems strange to me. Why would she do that willingly? When again, she's got a cat to get back to. And if, say, she was going to go to the store, bring her items back to her campsite, drop them off, and then maybe leave again for a little while and think her cat was going to be okay, well, why was all that stuff still found in her car? It doesn't make any sense to me that you would buy groceries, some of which, at least a couple of which had to be somewhat perishable. Or maybe not, I guess, if you're camping and you maybe don't have a cooler or anything. I don't know what her full setup was or what all the groceries were that she would have had. But still, why would you, especially when you're going right past your campsite on your way to this new spot? It just didn't seem to me that her car ended up there because she just went up there on her own. Which leads me to believe she didn't go up there, park her car, and then walk um, to a spot overlooking the ocean and then accidentally fall in. And again, why would you go up there to do it? Why wouldn't you just go back to your campsite, which has beach access right there, right in front of you? And, I glanced at some imagery of both Harris Beach and at least the beach near Whales Head State Park. And there's some elevated portions where definitely like if somebody was up there, they could have fallen off the edge and definitely died. I mean, it wouldn't have even taken being swept out to sea for them to die. Just the distance they fell down probably would have killed them. But at the same time, obviously, it depends on how adventurous one person is, but a lot of these spots that I saw that really were high enough or treacherous enough that somebody would even likely fall off the edge, those spots by themselves were, you had to climb a pretty steep, and so just getting to a potential spot that uh, you could, I guess, gauge a good view out on the ocean and would potentially be in danger of falling, are hard enough to access in general. I can't say for certain how much of an adventurer Irin Meyer was, whether she would have done that, but it just seemed like most of the most likely spots that one would go up to wherein it would be likely if they fell that they would die or be swept out to sea were extremely difficult to access. Doesn't mean it couldn't have happened, but still, when all is said and done, I don't see any real solid evidence that, under the circumstances of what we do know, that she would have died on accident. I definitely think she had an encounter with someone. And not to get too broad about the whole thing, but there's always been a history of just the Oregon coast is beautiful. It's gorgeous. I love going there. I love visiting pretty much any part. Astoria, Lincoln City, Newport, Florence, Coos Bay, what have you. But all these little towns peppering the Oregon coast, they almost all have they have a lot of odd people that have lived there, that have gone through there. There's been a lot of strange murders that have happened. And even if you go through some of these towns today, and it was a lot like this, 1979 was not that long ago, and a lot of these coastal Oregon towns, with a few exceptions, haven't really changed that much. And there's been some bizarre stuff that's happened out there. I know that there's a lot of people that have gone missing from the Oregon coast. I know there was a couple girls in the early 90s that I believe were visiting the vicinity of Newport and then just disappeared. And some people have suggested that serial killer John Aykroyd may have been responsible for that. It's also been suggested that fairly infamous and really kind of unknown serial killer, a guy named Bobby Jack Fowler, who I think is known to have killed at least like 25 people and a handful in Oregon. I don't remember the details, but I remember in a small town, I can't, Port Orford, which is relatively close to Gold Beach, not too far north from where Irin Meyer was staying, in a very small town. And I remember passing through there once because I wanted to take pictures of this cool old house that was there. And it was a very strange town when we drove through it. It was just very odd, very unwelcoming. And I remember there was a pretty gruesome murder that happened there many, many years back. So what I'm getting at is there's always been, not to put a stain on all these little coastal towns, because I love them, But almost every single one of them, there's a lot of weirdos wandering around. And some of that may be the fact that in a lot of those towns, the property is fairly affordable. So you've got, I mean, obviously you have a lot of people that just don't have a lot of money, but you have a lot of, kind of deadbeat people, a lot of people that are just a little strange living there. Every single time I've been to the Oregon coast, doesn't matter if I've been in Astoria, Lincoln City, Newport, Depot Bay, there's always this, as you walk around, there's always this handful of oddballs walking around. So I'm just saying that, Irin Meyer stops off at this store in Brookings, and who knows what kind of weirdo she could have stumbled onto. And I don't get the feeling that she was probably the victim of a serial killer. I feel like she was more the victim of some kind of predator that saw her and decided to take the risk, see if they could manipulate them into a scenario where they could gain control of the situation. And in the end, Irin Meyer disappeared. I feel pretty strongly that she was murdered by somebody. And that's the twist. If she didn't accidentally fall off of some high perch into the ocean and get washed away, if somebody killed her in that vicinity, they could have taken her out to a similar location like that and tossed her body into the ocean. Now, it is risky because you always, when you're along the shoreline, you're pretty close to the beach and you throw a body in, there's always the potential that the current might wash them ashore. It might carry them out, but it might not. So it can be risky to get rid of a body that way. But you also have to remember that you're in this area and it's fairly consistent up the Oregon coast. If you go east from the Oregon coast, you'll be generally kind of heading in the direction of the kind of coastal range, this kind of mountain range that runs relatively close to the Oregon coast. And there's all kinds of back roads. There's all kinds of gravel logging roads, lots of places that people don't usually go to, lots of desolate forested land, lots of places to get rid of a body. And the opportunities are even greater along the southern portion of Oregon's coast than the northern portion, because there's more towns to the north. But you start getting down towards southern Oregon, you have a lot of forested, desolate, and in some cases, depending on where you're at, rough terrain that a lot of people aren't going to go through. And you find the right spot, you can get rid of a body not too far from Brookings. And the possibility could be that it's never found. And here's another thing is, tragically, it's a fairly common thing that remains of people, not the whole body, but certain remains, somebody's arm bone, a skull that's probably been laying where it's been at for years, possibly a couple decades. Remains like that get found from time to time. And a lot of times they're so old, or they've been where they were so long, that you can't even get DNA from it anymore. I discussed that in another episode where I think I was discussing a certain missing person, and somebody referenced, I think it was the Barbara Gallagher case, that somebody looked up a potential Jane Doe connection, and it was in relation to a skull that had been found many, many years after Barbara Gallagher had gone missing. But a skull was found in Roseburg, Oregon, not too far from where she lived. And it was just a skull, and it had been there for a very long time. I doubt it was her, but one of the things I noticed looking at the information about that situation was they couldn't take any DNA from it. So, if they still have the teeth in the skull, maybe you might get lucky to identify somebody based on dental records. But when you can't get DNA from remains, it makes it a lot harder, the odds a lot longer that those remains are going to be identified as belonging to someone. So, there's the possibility, and maybe it's already happened. I haven't dug in and searched for all, it would take forever, and you might not come away with anything. But there's a possibility that some human remains, again, probably not a full body. A lot of times, especially if a body gets ditched in a rural landscape where you have a lot of wild scavenging animals, you're only going to find certain parts. You're only going to find some leg bones or some arm bones, or maybe not even a complete skull. And for all I know, remains like that could have been found, not necessarily right next to Brookings, but maybe 20 miles away, 30 miles away, not too far off. And, you know, sometimes remains are found and no DNA can be taken from them, so it's very unlikely that they'll ever be identified. But you could say, like, if something like that was found not too far from where Irin Meyer was last known to be, where her car was found, and you can theorize, is this possibly remains from her? Which would resolve the situation in a few instances. One, we actually have remains, so we have at least a general idea of where her body may have been put. Doesn't necessarily bring us any closer to a known suspect, but at least a few dots can be connected. And beyond that, we can validate for absolute certainty that she died and that she didn't run off. And you see, again, if her cat disappeared with her, I might be willing to engage the possibility that maybe Irin Meyer disappeared because she wanted to disappear. Because there's certainly suggestions that could lead one that way, and you have to be objective about that, because obviously, you know, you have to be very delicate with situations like this, because when you're dealing with a missing person, you're dealing with someone who has family that love them very much, and none of them want to hear the idea that the reason they disappeared is because they ran away. It's a very difficult thing to take, because if somebody does that, you as a family member have to acknowledge that they went out of their way to not see you anymore. Like, you'd think if somebody wanted to escape and start a new life for themselves, they might at least try to stay in contact with their parents, but then also be like, hey, can we keep this on the down low? And again, I feel like that is such a rare instance when someone disappears, that they did it on their own and that they're still alive somewhere far away, possibly living under a different identity, and hence, you know, family members can't find them. But the fact that Irin Meyer kind of just up and left her life in St. Louis, you know, ditched her job, ditched her home, and just took off and hit the road, you know, you think, how far would she be from going from that to just like, hey, you know, I've already up and left my life there. Maybe I should just start something new somewhere else. And that could be totally understandable. I could totally understand her wanting to start a brand new life after this. But there's a difference between saying, hey, I'm going to settle like on the West Coast and start a new life and pursue a new career and just have new experiences. There's a big difference between doing that and completely disappearing, so nobody, not even your family and friends and loved ones, have any idea what happened to you. Those are two drastically different things. And if she was going to start a new life for herself, she wouldn't have left her cat behind. I don't think that would have happened. But other elements, you know, the car being ditched nearby, that could be representative of somebody trying to run away and start a new life for themselves. So there's certainly things that hint at that being possible, but still, as in most cases, I don't quite think that's what happened. I think somebody got to her. And something that's potentially interesting, I don't know if it means anything. It may just be just kind of the wrong verbiage to use. So I don't know if this meant what it meant, or if this was maybe just the newspaper using a term in a more broad sense than it might have been taken by their readers. But one of the newspapers reported that she was first reported officially missing on July 24th, roughly 4 days after she was last actually seen alive. And it was described that a boyfriend of hers living in Deschutes County, which is kind of towards Central Oregon. That's where Bend is. So I don't know if by boyfriend they mean boyfriend, or if just like some guy she knew really well, because again, she did have family and friends on the West Coast. I don't know, maybe she had a long distance relationship while she was in St. Louis. And maybe that was her, well, I don't think it was her endpoint, because apparently she was supposed to be in Nevada by the 24th and she didn't show up. So I don't know if this boyfriend was a bona fide boyfriend or just a guy that was a close friend of hers. Because I'm wondering, like, was she supposed to pass through there? It seems logical that maybe at some point she was supposed to go there. Maybe she'd already visited there before setting up camp at Harris Beach on the coast. I don't know for certain, but that's when she was reported missing. And the first sighting of her car at Whale's Head was on July 26th. That was the first time that anybody there noticed the car. As it sat there for a few days, that's when it got more and more attention, and ultimately it was reported and law enforcement came out and it was checked and analyzed and the groceries and all that were found. That was on the 29th. So the car had been there a couple of days, but still, what's of interest is that the last time Irin Meyer is seen is on the 20th, and her car isn't seen again until the 26th. That's 6 days. That's almost a whole week of time that it appears this car was missing. And maybe it was there a little bit earlier than the 26th, but considering the fact that people started noticing it a couple days before it was even reported to authorities, makes me think it wouldn't have been there that long. And I think at the very least there was still probably at least 4 or 5 days that the car seems to have just been gone. Its whereabouts unaccounted for. Now, where would the car have been during all that time? I don't think Irin Meyer was just joyriding around for several days. So that I think is some of the strongest evidence that someone took her. It is just that, not only was she missing, but her car was missing for a decent length of time. Where was her car at? She, again, because of the cat, going back to the cat, and the fact that her groceries were found in the car, I mean, she didn't go back to the campsite and then just drive off somewhere else for a while. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all that she would have just been driving around by herself. So I think that adds to the idea that under some set of circumstances on the 20th, this is where I go with this, somebody got to her, and I don't know if they forced her to drive somewhere far away, somewhere secluded where they wouldn't be seen, because I haven't found any reports during that time of anybody seeing her car driving around. So if it was driving around, it probably was off-road a bit, back roads, something like that. I still get a really strong sense that she probably was lured or taken to some rural setting, kind of probably not too far from Brookings. And if she was murdered, her remains are somewhere in the hills, not too far from there. That's my gut feeling. And she may have been kept. I hate to get really dark with it, but I've seen enough not just serial killer documentaries, but documentaries about crazy, sick, sadistic psychos, to put it simply. And I've heard story after story of crazed people, and a lot of these people are serial offenders. Not necessarily serial killers, but a lot of them kind of ultimately graduate to that. And I've heard a lot of stories about women being abducted under a mess of different circumstances, and the guys that take them, if they are these kind of people, they will keep them and, let's just say, abuse them for several days on end until essentially they deem themselves done with them. And a lot of times, sometimes they get released, but a lot of times when these disgusting heathens get all that they want out of them, they will kill them and move on to the next victim. I've heard so many stories about stuff like that. And so if you look at that as a possibility, as dark and demented as it is, some guy seizes an opportunity and is able to abduct Irin Meyer and take her somewhere else that's not readily accessible by others. Nobody's going to see them. Nobody sees her. Nobody sees her car. And these people will abuse these women that they abduct, again, for days on end. So, did something like that happen? And she's kept at some location for a while this is happening. And her car is kept there until the guy's done with her, kills her off, and then realizes, okay, well, now I've got to get rid of this car. I can't just leave this car here, because if I do, and it eventually gets found, people are going to be asking me a lot of questions. So those days pass, he kills her, and then relocates the car to this random location. That is entirely possible, but it might also explain this multiple day period where Erin's car is missing, and then it just shows up again a couple miles north of where she was camping. I mean, I think even that possibility is much stronger than she slipped off a cliff and accidentally fell to her death, or that she split on her own. It's a horrible possibility to think about, but it does happen, and it's happened way too much to too many women. And it could have definitely happened in this case. And it's also worthy to note that some items were missing, namely Erin's key ring that would have had her car key on it, and it apparently had like a keychain on it that had the word boss on it. It was a very distinct keychain, something that if somebody found it, it would probably be almost 100% certainty that this was hers. That's never been found. She also had been traveling with a Vivitar camera. That was never found, and that's always been considered a pretty significant piece of evidence that if that could be found, could be helpful. Obviously, if it was discarded elsewhere, that might lead authorities to a better understanding of where she ended up or what happened. Also, if you could find that camera and see what pictures were taken on it, maybe there's something of interest, something that could give them a lead in the film in that camera. Granted, this was 1979. This was more than 40 years ago. If the camera was found today, the film would probably be unable to be processed. But back then, that had to be what authorities were thinking. And so those two items in particular, obviously in addition to Irin herself, had vanished. So, yeah, all things considered, I honestly think somebody grabbed her and took her away somewhere. And I don't think her bones are sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean somewhere. I think her bones are most likely, again, up in the hills, up in a forested rural area somewhere not too far from Brookings. That's the gut feeling I get from this case. And from there, I want to transition into what I discussed earlier, which was people on Reddit who have looked at this case. I believe it was just one Redditor brought to everyone's attention another case that seems somewhat similar to Irin Meyer's case, pretty far removed. This occurred several hundred miles away, but again, based on the time that this happened and the strange circumstances, I think there's at least a discussion to be had. I'm weary of saying that I feel there's a connection here, but on the flip side of that, I certainly can't say to an absolute certainty that there couldn't be something related to that. And since, this series is very much about addressing these cases, and especially in missing persons cases where you don't have a body, you don't have a crime scene, there's a lot of questions that are unanswered. You want to address as much as you can with the limited information and or evidence available. So I want to discuss this other case briefly as well, even though I honestly, gut feeling again, doubt that there's a relation between the two, but it is interesting. So on May 27th, 1979, a little less than 3 months before Irin Meyer went missing, and Elaine Marie Robertson stumbled into a campground not too far from Tacoma, Washington. She was wet, haggard. She appeared disoriented, like she didn't really know where she was. The description of it I almost get the vibes that she had taken some kind of a drug of some kind. Now, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but she just seemed kind of unaware of what was going on. Like she was kind of disassociated from everything and just looked real haggard. And as far as I could gather, didn't give an explanation why, but people that were camping there saw her and came to assist her, like, hey, are you all right? You look like you've been through hell here. And she just simply asked these people there if she could just stay the night there with them. And that's all the information I gathered in terms of what she said to these people. No explanation of where she'd been, why she looked the way she was, if she was running away from somebody. She just asked if she could stay, and these people pitched an extra tent for her to stay the night, and she apparently did. And when these people awoke the next morning and checked the tent, Elaine Robertson was gone, and she hasn't been seen since. And if nothing else, there's just what makes this case so interesting in relation to Irin Meyer's case is all of these tiny little comparable details. In addition to the fact that they happened the same year, just a couple months apart. Elaine Robinson was from San Luis Obispo, California, and was up camping in Washington. So like Irin Meyer, she had traveled a long way from home and was just off camping at a kind of nondescript Pacific Northwest location. She was traveling with her dog, so she also had a pet with her. And unfortunately, in her case, when she disappeared, her dog apparently disappeared as well. Her dog was never found either. And all seemed normal and well. She was camping at a different campsite before she ended up at this other one. So it's a wonder why she ended up there and why she was asking people if she could stay and camp there, if she had a campsite set up at another park that wasn't all that far away from there. And something else that also correlates with the Irin Meyer story is that the vehicle that Elaine Robertson was traveling in, the van that she drove, was found roughly a mile away from the campground where she stayed the night with these people before she vanished forever. So it was another situation where the vehicle the person was driving who disappeared was found just a short distance away from where they'd been. And when her van was found, the battery was dead. It appeared that it had been leaking oil. I don't know to what extent that had been happening, if the oil leak was just kind of a, lots of cars just develop oil leaks over time. You kind of just have to compensate for it if you're not going to spend the money or have the money to fix it. So I don't know if it was just the car had an oil leak or if it was like it had been leaking to a point that it was affecting the car's performance to a rather serious degree. So it seems like her van broke down on her. I don't know what the weather was like that day, because the one theory I threw out there was, did her van break down on her and she had to wander, up the street and ultimately make it to this campground, and that would explain why she was wet and kind of haggard. It doesn't really explain the kind of sense of disorientation she had. But again, it seems like she didn't really say much to these people that might provide an explanation for why she was in that state. And the fact that she walked onto the campground, she didn't drive up and get out of her van, also leads me to believe that her van broke down and she walked to this campground. So that could also explain why she asked these people to stay there instead of going back to her own campground. Was she probably wasn't even in a good set of circumstances to go that far, and here's a closer campground, can I stay here? I'm in a tight spot. I would potentially theorize then that she wakes up early the next day. Now again, this is assuming nothing nefarious has happened yet, but based on her condition the night before, I feel like something frightening or traumatizing may have happened to her before. Could she have broke down and then encountered someone sketchy along the highway that she had to elude? So she goes into a campground with lots of other people and is like, hey, can I stay here with you? Like, there's a guy that I think might be following me. That could have happened. But another possibility is she wakes up early and leaves. And she's going to try to figure out how to, fix this situation. Get her van running again. Either finish her camping trip or more likely pack her stuff up and just go home at this point. And I almost get the feeling that, she couldn't just go back to her van. She needed help. She needed someone to, at least jumpstart her battery, which means there's the possibility she could have returned to her van and then tried to wave down a passing car. Say, hey, do you have jumper cables? My van's dead. I need a jump. And in that set of circumstances, now somebody is stopped there with her. And how many stories have we heard about somebody who's walking the street or hitchhiking and gets picked up by the wrong person and either turns up dead or is never seen again? There's a really troubling video that Nexpo, one of my favorite YouTubers, did about this school where they used to send, this has a point in relation to this, where people would send their troubled kids away, and these kids would pretty much be tormented there. And it was extremely difficult to escape, and only a few kids ever successfully escaped. And there was one girl who managed to escape this horrible place that she was stuck in. And as she was fleeing, through the kind of rural landscape around there, she managed to wave down a trucker, and the trucker picked her up. That trucker then killed her a little later on. So you think you finally escape this horrible nightmare of a place and you walk right into another nightmare. I mean, the number of stories where people just get picked up along a rural stretch of highway and they're never seen again. And a lot of times there's truckers involved, unfortunately. Not to malign all truckers out there, but there's a lot of sketchy, bad truck drivers out there. So somebody, pulls up and stops. And it wouldn't surprise me if somebody with very dark motivations pulls up and says like, oh, hey, you got car troubles? Hey, I don't have jumper cables, but hop into my car and I'll take you to the nearest, this place and we can get you a new battery, or I'll take you to this place where you can call somebody. Something like that. It's the late 70s. People certainly weren't as apprehensive about getting into cars with strangers at that time, although it was becoming more and more known that hitchhiking was a pretty bad idea. But here's a young woman potentially in a tough situation. What's she going to do? She's hundreds of miles from home with a dead van in an area she probably doesn't know that well. Here's a guy offering to assist you. You probably get into the car with him. And then you disappear forever. That's a possibility. It doesn't quite fit with the circumstances under which Irin Meyer might have disappeared, because there's no sign that there was any issues with her car. I haven't found much information about how seriously her car was checked, dusted for prints, gathering of evidence, individual hairs, things like that. Things that could be used to potentially identify a suspect later, because again, if my theory is correct, that she was taken away somewhere and that her killer would have had to have relocated her car for her, then that individual's in her car. And they're probably going to leave at least some evidence behind. So, but the fact that her car was in perfect working order sets up different circumstances from Elaine Marie Robertson, and there's a lot of questions. It was a very strange disappearing case, a case that almost deserves its own video in this series, but because it was brought up in relation to Irin Meyer, I decided to cover it here. And again, they're very far removed. They're a couple months apart, so close enough. But I get the feeling that, unfortunately, I feel like both these women met with foul play. They either got in the wrong car with someone or let the wrong person into their car. But I personally think the individuals that were responsible for those two disappearances were two different people, although there's always the slight possibility that it could have been the same person. There, especially in the 70s and into the 80s, there were a lot of killers who would travel long distances, or if they traveled for work. You know, if you live in Los Angeles and you have to travel to Seattle on business, you might have victims in California and Washington. During this time, one of the most brutal serial killers ever, who isn't as well known as others, is a guy named Randy Kraft. And he was known for killing a lot of young men in California, but he would travel up to Portland on business. And there were at least, I think, like 4 people that he picked up and killed in Oregon. So there's a situation where he traveled around for business and victims turned up in those areas as well. So could this have been something comparable? Maybe. I doubt it, but it is possible. So, reverting back to Irin Meyer, yeah, when all is said and done, all we have left is her car. And, you know, what exactly does it mean, the fact that it ended up parked not too far from where she was camping, but past that location? And I've made my perspective pretty well known here. A lot of these missing persons cases, I'm kind of left up in the air about them, but I feel pretty strongly, based on the fact that she never made it back, as far as I'm concerned, to her campsite, and she would have gone back. She wouldn't have left her cat. She had bought cat food at the store. Like, she would have been going straight back to her campsite. Something must have happened between here and there. And most likely, this individual took her off somewhere, abused her for several days, or kept her for a couple of days under some other circumstances, or the other odd possibility, abducted her, took her somewhere and killed her relatively quickly, and then for whatever reason stayed there and hid out for a while before relocating her car somewhere. The fact that her car wasn't seen for so many days before it was noticed in this other location really leads me to believe that she was kept somewhere for a little while. And then when she was got rid of, her car got moved. That's what I honestly believe in this case. It's only one theory. There's definitely other possibilities. There always is in cases like this. And as far as I can gather, that's really all I have to say on this particular case, the disappearance of Irin Marie Meyer, who was just trying to enjoy some life on the road, traveling around, visiting family and friends, seeing new places, and somehow in the middle of it all, she just vanished forever. So I'd like to thank you guys, as always, for stopping by, taking in today's video. I really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel or haven't gotten around to it yet, remember to like the video, share it around if you want, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet and you like what I'm doing. You can also hit up my Patreon and help me out there as well. Every little bit helps. Those are all different avenues you can go by to help my channel, help me continue to grow, and it all makes it easier to do what I'm trying to do here. The link to my Patreon is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Facebook, my Instagram, my Reddit subreddit, and my TikTok. And all of that said, thanks again for stopping by. I hope you, I always hate to say, I hope you enjoyed the video. Or at least I hope this video affected you, at least in some way. And, you know, like all of them, as unlikely as it is to happen, you always hope that someday there's going to be a resolution to cases such as this. All that said, till next time, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian.